Welcome to the Happy Lawyer Project. I'm your host, Akoma Moronu, and I created this show to help lawyers find happiness in life with a law degree. Together with my guest, we provide the knowledge, skills, insight, and inspiration that you'll need to find your happy. Welcome back, lawyers. I am excited to have you here, and today's episode is a doozy and one that I really enjoyed recording. Today's guest is hilarious and super smart and super insightful about our profession. And so I was excited to chat with Mike Whelan about the research he's been doing for his new book, which is tentatively titled Lawyer Forward: Finding Your Place in the Future of Law. In this book, he uses his experiences as an attorney, the founder of Lawyer Forward Conference, and as his logistics background to explore really big questions about the future of the practice of law. We discuss what it means to be innovative in the law, whether technology is a real threat to lawyers, and how lawyers can adapt their practices for the future. It's a really far-reaching conversation, and my hope is that it will get those creative juices flowing when it comes to innovating in your practice. Welcome back to the Happy Lawyer Project, lawyers. I am super excited to dig into today's conversation with the infamous Mike Whelan. Mike, welcome to the show.
What's up? I'm sitting here before we talk, doing my mouth stretches. I was in theater as a kid and never did what I was supposed to do, and my teachers would get mad at me all the time. And we did these mouth opening things. So right before you hit record, there's probably a sound of me gaping my mouth. And how are you? So,
you've now set the bar very high. We're going to expect a lot from your tone and tenor of your voice. So for those out there who don't know who you are, I'd love if you could just start with a brief description of who you are and what it is that you do.
This is a terrible question because I have no idea. Working through that. So the short version is I graduated from law school in 2011. This is a lawyer podcast, so I'm going to focus on my lawyer time. I went to the University of Texas. I was 30 at the time. I had worked for almost a decade before that in logistics and transportation and stuff. And then I went to law school and I was at UT and graduated in 2011. So I was the last group. I went in September of 2008 and it was October of 2008 when the banks crashed. So we were the last group that had no freaking idea what was about to happen. And so I went to law school. I came out. I've run my own practice from the beginning. And now I've kind of shifted. I found as I practice, I kept asking questions out loud and it prompted conversations. And so now I'm mostly spending my time on those conversations. I would consider myself a member of legal media now, I guess, and just mostly writing and speaking and teaching and questioning and making some people angry and, the cool stuff, the 2019 stuff,
Well, that's why I wanted to have you on, because I do think you're having a lot of those important conversations. I see too many people having the same old conversations and refusing to ask the hard questions and really admit the hard truths, which I think you're doing. And so I want to kind of highlight some of that here today. How did you kind of find the area of interest? What about those conversations was interesting to you?
So I consider myself a teacher. I always have. It's just been part of my identity. I remember when I was a kid, my mom would call me professor. And I've got all kinds of mom issues we can talk through if you want to turn this podcast into a therapy thing. But I always had this idea in my mind that I was this professor, this teacher type. But I actually got married really young. I was 22. We started having kids at 23. And I was working at the time at Swift Transportation and in a trucking company. And when we got pregnant with our second, Ellie, I realized if I don't go back to school now, I'm never going to. I won't ever get that degree. And this kind of identity thing that I had would be totally jacked up and I would feel just that dissonance for the rest of my life. So we packed up the truck and moved to Beverly. Well, not really. It wasn't Beverly Hills. You might be too young for that.
I'm the same. I don't think that we're that far apart.
Reference. Well, you just look so darn young. Just take that, okay?
Well, every day of the week.
But we moved to Provo, Utah, which is not remotely Beverly Hills. And I went to college at BYU. And I did a Middle East Studies degree, which was totally weird. I originally went to go for pre-dental. That was how I justified to my wife the amount of debt we were about to get into. And then I realized, I didn't know this. In dental school, it's not just that dentists give shots, right? It's that they give each other shots in dental school. They practice putting needles in each other's faces. In law school, I was like, no, I'm not doing that. I said in law school. In dental school, maybe law school sort of felt like people were poking needles. Anyway, I decided I'm not going to dental school, and I shifted to Middle East studies, which was a big jump. And I actually got accepted to a PhD program in Middle East studies. I won a Fulbright grant to go to Jordan for a year to study Islamic banking. There was this whole path, this plan. And my sweet wife, who, in fairness to her, did not know me very well at the time, was like, no, you just want to live on debt and get through, just study stupid stuff all the time. There's not a job plan. The job market is terrible, which was true even then for professors. And we're not getting into a bunch of debt to get into a terrible job market. So instead, we went to law school in 2008 and got into—
Joke's on her.
Yeah. I tell her all the time, way to go, dummy.
Oh.
but she didn't know me very well. It really did. I really would probably go to school for the rest of my life if someone let me. And I went to law school. We got in way more debt than I would have otherwise, going to the PhD program. And coming out, the job situation was so bad in 2011. And in truth, I'm super glad now that it was so terrible, because I never could have functioned in a big firm environment. I'm just not designed to have a job. And I found, as time went on, I kind of gained this sort of expansive idea of what it means to be a lawyer, and that it really is at its core. I'd say in the book that I think our role is preserving humanity on purpose. And so those big social questions that I was asking, that I would be asking as a professor, now I'm asking them as a lawyer. And I don't think that it's that out of step. It just gave me a place to talk about it. And so I'm in retrospect, I'm really glad that I went to law school. It gave me another way to ask those big questions. And it's, for the last 10 years, it's been kind of giving myself permission to do that full time, and to, instead of focusing on just paying the bills, now I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to keep asking those questions and see what happens.
There's so many things I want to dig into there. First of all, I want to take a slight detour. Do you read Jonathan Fields' stuff at all?
No.
Jonathan Fields is a former big law attorney. He now does a lot of guru self-help. He runs the Good Life Project, and he has a podcast under the same name. And he recently released one of those personality test things, but it's like, what type of activities spark joy in your life? And one of them is called the Maven, which is what I thought I was, which is what I think you are, which is you enjoy learning for the sake of learning. Like, no matter what you were learning, you were going to be somebody who learned. And then, so my Sparko type, as he calls them, is the Sage, which means I love sharing information, which is really interesting, because I think that would probably be your secondary. But that's what I had literally just did this test, and it just made me think that we're very similar in that way, because the Sage is my first and the Maven is my second. I did the Kolbe test, which I'm a big fan of. Yep.
If you guys have not taken it's Kolbe space A. And it's kind of, I don't know if I would say a skills focused test. More, it's a personality test, not in the sense that it says, go do this certain kind of job or whatever, but in the sense that it says, this is the kind of environment you do well in that's really in line. And it very much described me as a teacher, as somebody who gets through information by talking through it, by sharing and teaching. And so, it was weird because I didn't get into the formalized, go get your PhD and go be a professor and whatever. But man, in 2019, there are so many different ways to teach that don't require you go through that formalized system. So I've kind of been exploring that, both for myself and for, when I talk to lawyers, how they might design their business as well.
So you also mentioned something that I was going to wait to dig into later, but since you brought it up, I would love for you to expand on. You said you have been working on giving yourself permission, and I'd love to know a little bit more about that process and how you came to feel that you needed that permission and how that work is going for you.
There was a meme going around the Twitter machine asking what's the most on-brand thing or whatever from your childhood. And I shared an example of me crying at when I lost a regional spelling bee. And the reason this is relevant is because I had no business being at that spelling bee regional competition, right? I'm not a spelling bee ringer. I had no idea what I was doing. But at the elementary school where they were doing this spelling bee, I kept winning. Like I would go through and I would spell onomatopoeia or whatever, and then I'd sit down and all the kids around me would say, I heard them whispering and would say things like, whoa, I didn't realize he was smart. And I'm like, wait a second, I'm smart? And so I had to deal with this whole emotional journey in the middle of this spelling bee of going, wait a minute, maybe the way I identify myself as the class clown is not really the real thing. Maybe I'm like a super genius and I'm supposed to win spelling bees. Yes, then my mom would be so proud of me, mom issues again. And I go to this spelling bee and I win at the school level, and I'm now all worked up at the regional level, and I'm like, I'm a super genius who's going to just blow the doors off the spelling bee industry, as if there's an industry. I have no idea. And then I lost, and the emotional letdown was so huge, and I start crying, and of course mom issues, my mom gets mad at me for crying. She's like, what the heck are you crying about? You did not even care about this thing. And back to your question of giving myself permission, I've always kind of had this thing where I identify myself, like I said, as a teacher, as a guy who tells jokes and gets some attention. And, that's my fulfillment. I was a performer in high school. I was in theater, but I wasn't an actor. I was a performer. I was trying to get that feedback and the applause and all that. And when you mixed in being smarter than average, I guess, I was always really uncomfortable with that. And it took me a long time to say, listen, man, like you can ask heady questions and you can have ideas and you can answer them and you can write. You can even put words down on paper and put them out to the world and see what happens. And it's been, to be frank with you, really difficult because my own insecurity, I feel like an idiot most of the time. And so, and the online world is such that if you put something out there, somebody's going to tell you you're an idiot. And 99 people can tell you, holy crap, that was amazing. But that one person tells you you're an idiot, and that defines like the rest of your day. It's me anyway. It's really hard for me to let that go. And so when you think about that permission thing, I was so obsessed with the person that thinks I'm an idiot, because it was usually my mother voice in my head, it was me, right, that agreed with that. And so I couldn't get myself to say, dude, go write a book or go engage with people online or go speak at a conference, because I knew there was going to be somebody who didn't get it or didn't agree. And I just let that define myself forever. So over time, it became stop trying to win over everyone. Stop looking for that you stand on stage and you get the standing ovation response, and realize that you're really working just on you. You might be working out loud and it might help other people, but the function here is not so much a market justification for you exploring the ideas in your head, but it's more you are developing something. It happens to be really necessary for society that people do this. But it's risky, and it took me a long time to make myself okay with doing that work.
There's so much. So,
Sorry.
No. I love it, because I'm going to be a little vulnerable here and tell you something that it's really embarrassing for me to share. But
yeah,
literally probably in the last 5 years is when it first really, really resonated with me that people come up with ideas.
Right.
Now, I know that sounds so basic, but I grew up with such a respect for learning and the idea that things were learned from other people, and that ideas came from other people had ideas. I never really questioned where they got those ideas. I just thought everything came from was passed down, and that all knowledge was known at some point that we're now learning. I don't know how I reconcile that with the idea that new inventions were made. I didn't do that mental work. But to your point about being the creator of something or having an idea and putting it out there, it like didn't even occur to me that that's something I could do. That like I could have ideas, whether or not anyone's ever had them before or, expressed them in the way I express them, but that they were unique to me in some way
Right.
never occurred to me.
And there's so much negative feedback, really, that if you want to look for the I have no right to say something, you can find it, right? Somebody's going to give you that feedback that because you're too young, I'm going to take it from your perspective, because you're too young or because you're a woman or a minority or because you didn't go to this school or that school or whatever the thing is. But you take I use the example all the time of Alan Dershowitz as this kind of expert business model that I talk about in this book that I just wrote. Alan Dershowitz he didn't wake up as Alan Dershowitz.
Yep.
He wrote books, he explored, he did things out loud. He was wrong for a lot of years. And maybe you think he's wrong now. He's kind of gone off the rails a little bit with this whole commentary on the Trump presidency, but whatever, the point is we tend to think of, it's kind of a cliche now in the kind of online guru world. We talk about 10-year overnight successes, right? But really, when you go back and do the work, I remember landing on a YouTube video of Chris Stapleton. I don't know if you know who he is. He's a country singer. I hate country music, but it doesn't matter. The guy's voice is amazing. And he kind of came on the scene all of a sudden a few years ago and won a whole bunch of awards and did this amazing musical number with Justin Timberlake. And I have kind of a JT man crush. And it was super amazing. And everybody was like, man, where the hell did this guy come from? This guy is the best. And I landed on a YouTube video of him singing some 10 years earlier on a cruise ship in a tiny room with a bunch of old people playing bingo. And, he could not have stood on the stage with JT unless he had had that cruise ship moment. And it's so hard for us as creators, as individuals, to give ourselves permission to play to a small room of purple-haired bingo playing old ladies. We just want the JT on stage moment. And it doesn't work like that. You can't get the latter bit without major luck. And quite frankly, here's the other thing. There's a book called Luck on this that's really fascinating. Chris Stapleton was still lucky. As much as he was good and as much as he developed his craft and was great, when you look at, he's still a statistical anomaly. He's still a freak. It still is really unusual that he made this leap. And so when you make the decision to create, if you do it on the justification that I'm going to be Chris Stapleton singing with JT, the chances of that are still so slim. So I had to find a different justification for my creativity. In the end, it was about me. It was internal. And that was all about giving myself permission.
And there's so many levels to that, I think, because for me, the thing I struggle with is that I bought all of those. There's all these stories I told myself about why I wasn't a person who could be the channel for this, for information or for content or whatever the case may be. And then when some people started turning to me for it, I didn't understand that. And I wasn't ready to step into that role because I was like, well, someone said this before. Like, why would they listen to me? I'm sure that it's been said before. I'm sure it's all been done before. I'm sure. But who people hear things from, how they hear it, and when they're ready to hear it is so much about what it's about. And I think that even if you do the work, even if you have those cruise ship moments, even if, you work your way through the 10-year process, you still have to be the person to give yourself permission to have that JT moment. Because he could still have said, no, I'm not ready for this. Like, I'm a cruise ship singer. Like, I'm not a JT level. Even though he knows he's ready, even though he thinks he's good enough, he could have been the person to hold himself back. And so there's so many levels of permission that you have to keep giving yourself in order to get from here to there.
Yeah, I don't care what else comes out of this podcast. We are going to popularize the term JT moment because that needs to happen.
Well, yeah, I'm waiting my life for my JT moment. So, and try and pull this back on the rails. We first met 2 years ago at a conference that you throw annually, which, you're now kind of putting an end to for lots of reasons. But I, at the time, had been thinking about starting my own conference because I love conferences and I think that there's such a great opportunity in the legal space for conferences. But between you and me, it's, it's
I do know.
tired out there. Where are you on legal conferences? How are you feeling about the future of why, I don't know why there's such a struggle to make, there's so many amazing conferences, and you see what people are doing with conferences in other industries. And as always, in the legal profession, we just want to do things the way it's always been done. But maybe I'm overly, and I'm never the pessimist. I'm the most optimistic person, but this is one area where I'm struggling.
Well, and I'll say this with the caveat that I stopped doing Lawyer Forward, right? I've had this, it went for 5 years, and it was so difficult because people would come to me and they would say, oh my gosh, this changed my life. I mean, we had a guy a couple of years ago who showed up last minute. People worked really hard to make sure he could be there. We really melted his brain, and it was such a great experience. And at the end of the conference, he stood up and took the microphone, and grown man crying, saying, this was so important. This was so great. And then, as the creator, that fills you.
Yep.
For somebody to come up and say, this has changed my life. And that's that, applause at the end of the theater performance. And I'm just like, yeah, man, let's keep doing this. But then that same guy, I talked to him some 8 months later on the phone, and he's like, yeah, life sucks. My marriage is falling apart. I don't know what's going on with my business. And I'm like, bro, did you do any of the thing? No, I didn't do any of those things. And ultimately, I think there's way behind the problems with legal conferences is this fundamental issue of they don't create the change that they promise. And for my own conference, I realized I was promising major change, but then I was having these conversations with people. Some people were changing. I mean, look, some people show up and they're ready, and it sort of doesn't matter what I say. If I give them a tip to, use online scheduling, or to here's how you implement flat fee billing, or some little tactic, those people are ready. And so they take it up and they make you feel like you did a great job. But the truth is, what I was trying to do of that major change, it just wasn't happening. And so I had to step back and say, to borrow from Seth Godin, I had to ask, who is this for? And what's the change that we want to see? And if you think about most, especially CLE conferences, I'm going to, to focus on that kind of concept of the continuing legal education conference, I don't know what the change is that they want to see. And I don't really know who it's for. If the purpose is to turn lawyers into subject matter experts or people who deliver justice, I don't know how sitting and listening to an old white guy read code sections from a PowerPoint slide for an hour, I really don't know how that gets to that kind of change. And so I'm like, who is this for? Why does this thing exist? And in Texas, I can only speak to Texas. The Texas State Bar makes $16 million a year from continuing legal education. And it seems really weird to me that the people who are mandating continuing legal education are really the only people getting the money out of it.
Yep.
And money is just a thing. Let's say that that's a good that's delivered out of it. If what they were getting was money in exchange for the change that they promised, fine. I have no problem with that. If what they're doing is changing lawyers and turning them into experts who can go and serve society and whatever, and that change is happening, get rich. I don't care. But if that's the only deliverable, if that's the only good that's coming out of this thing, I have to really question what's it for. And so right now, I think there's a fundamental issue about what it's for. What are we trying to create? And I think I've got a thought on that about the other kinds of legal conferences, but tell me what you think about CLE conferences. Are you in the same place?
Oh, absolutely. I will no longer go to CLE conferences. I now do all my CLE online because, to be honest, I just think that there's so much more innovation. Like, I can find more dynamic online courses that are tailored to what I want to learn than spend time and energy traveling to a CLE conference that has like 2 sessions that I'm really interested in. And to your point, it's often old white men, in my opinion, speaking to young white men about how to get where they got. And
oh my gosh, that was the most insightful thing that I've ever heard. Yes. Like, I always complain about the old white guy reading slides, from PowerPoint, like reading code. And the idea that we have a really hard time in legal with transferring best practices generationally. We don't do a very good job of transferring knowledge from one generation to another. There's this myth about the idea that lawyers used to hang out at bars after hearings or whatever, and now because of Twitter, we don't do that anymore. I don't know how much of that is true. I think society in general is becoming disconnected from personal, human-to-human relationships. But I think you're really right that when you go to a conference and you see a certain person, a certain look, a certain set of assumptions, and they say to you, here's a package of how to do it, that look and those assumptions and that kind of person is all wrapped up in that package. And I can't imagine for minority lawyers, female lawyers, people who come from different financial backgrounds or social backgrounds, I can't even imagine how isolating that is. For me as a young white guy going to those conferences, to be frank with you, I was honestly more mad for everybody else in the room. Like I could sit there and know pretty darn well that if I stood up in that same room, this is just a reality of legal conferences. If I stood up in that same room and gave the same presentation with the same kind of voice, I would have been accepted as a bald white guy, right? Nobody in the room would have been like, okay, I can't accept his opinion on how you collect child support or whatever, because people are so attuned to accept information from the old white guy, right? And there's a whole business model around that for CLE that just really drives me crazy. Now, I should say, there are really good people in the CLE industry.
Absolutely.
Trying to do right. And it's really unfair to classify it as a bunch of old white guys because, quite frankly, most of the organizers of these events are women. Well, most of the people getting credit for the events are men, but most of the people organizing them and putting them together are women who care about diversity and voice and whatever. Them creating manels of a bunch of white dudes sitting up there telling the room about whatever, there's so much sociology going on behind that has nothing to do with whether that woman organizer cares about voices. She does. But there's just so much going on behind that. So I want to give credit to the people who are trying to make it better, but the system itself is just, why, if the deliverable good is CLE credit, why would I not do it online? Like, it seems totally asinine. If that's what I'm there for, why would I not push play on my computer and then go back to playing Candy Crush?
Yep. And I think to the point you're making is that there was this sense that bringing people together was not just about the credit. It was about the community. It was about the networking opportunities. It was about the things that happened between the CLE credit. And if you come from a demographic group where it is harder to make those connections in a random room full of, people that you're only going to see for one day,
right,
it's not worth the time and energy, to be honest. Yeah. And you're exactly right. There are people behind the scenes who care. And I think in the legal profession, there is this struggle to balance this respect for tradition, respect for those who are considered leaders in the field, who have been around for a long time, with innovation, right? With what does there are the partners and the rainmakers who've been around forever, who saw us through, all of the recessions of all of the times and know what it takes. And then there are the new innovative partners who are trying to build virtual firms, who are trying to do these things that aren't tested. So do they deserve as much of a platform? Are they in a position to teach? And I guess this really goes back to our original conversation about who is in a position to teach, whose content is worth sharing, and who do we give space to and put, shine the spotlight on as being someone worth learning from in our profession.
Well, and that gets to the other kind of conferences, which bug me in a different way. I think CLE conferences give us the illusion that we're experts, right? There's this placebo effect of, this is what experts do, therefore I'm good. I went to a CLE conference and therefore I'm caught up, which, there's a book called Peak, and he talks about the studies of doctors and how as doctors age, they get worse at tasks. And that's been studied among doctors for a long time. And it would be really narcissistic and self-deluded to think the same is not true of lawyers who do mundane, repetitive work, but go to a CLE every year. with the illusion that, we can tell ourselves that we're doing what experts do, but we're not doing expert work. And so it's just a placebo effect. Innovation conferences are kind of a different category.
Yes.
But we do the same thing, where we'll go to these conferences and we get this placebo effect of, man, I'm such an innovative lawyer. And then we'll go home and we won't do anything. And I always described Lawyer Forward as a practice innovation conference, but I realized people weren't going home and doing anything. They weren't making a lot of changes, and therefore they weren't seeing the outcomes. And then, of course, they would say, okay, fine, this kind of conference doesn't work. But I'm sorry, if you go to a conference and you go to the stupid 60 apps in 60 minutes presentation, and you say to yourself, oh man, I know 60 apps. You don't know 60 apps, dude. You're not going to implement 60 apps. You just walked up to the trough and put a bunch of stuff in your head that you can't possibly implement to make yourself feel like I'm so freaking innovative. And you're going to go home and you're probably going to do the exact same thing that you did last week. And so part of the reason I wanted to get out of live events for now, I really think I'm going to reshape it and do something fundamentally different. But although I think live events are really important and are fundamental to the social connections required to really become great at what we do, that's not what we're doing. That's not the change that we're seeing, because that's not what we focus on. The deliverable that we're giving people is the placebo effect. And I just didn't want to be part of that anymore. I don't want to make lawyers feel like they changed, but then they call me 8 months later and they're still miserable. I don't want to be part of that industry. And so that's why I pulled out of it. So I really think legal professional education needs to have some fundamental changes, and we've got to get to that core of who's it for and what's the change we want to see, and start measuring it that way, because we don't. We measure it in terms of CLE credit and dollars, and that's what's being exchanged right now, and it's part of a massive problem in the legal industry. And so I just didn't want to do it anymore.
I completely resonate with that whole kind of line of thinking, because as you can imagine, my podcast has a similar goal and potential lack of impact. And, that's something I'm going to work through a lot this year, is really figuring out if it's making the impact that I want it to be making for the amount of time and energy that goes into producing and putting out this content.
Right.
I enjoy doing it, but I enjoy doing it less when it feels like it's just making people feel better about themselves without actually impacting their lives. But maybe that's good enough. I don't know. Working through it. So
I don't know. Well, and Seth Godin, if you read his new book, This is Marketing, he talks about how it's all about emotion and status. And I don't doubt that feeling of change motivates people to buy. So as a marketing exercise, I think Clio is probably the best in class of the legal conferences. And I use them as an example, not because I think they're particularly terrible, but because they're the best. And yet, I wrote an article after the latest Clio conference called On Cult and Culture, and kind of talked about how, the deliverable of the legal conference still is unclear. And it's even theirs, who was the best, I still was walking away going, what the heck is all of this for? Why do we have people presenting? Why do we have lawyers who tried a bot or something talking about bots as if they're an expert in that thing? And then those people become, whatever, branding experts or self-help experts or whatever, but there's no real expertise. And we all start kind of feeding each other on this illusion. I mean, this is the self-help industry in general. We're all kind of supporting each other and paying each other's bills, which is probably what all marketplaces are. But, it's just the exchange of money based on some kind of trust. But, in the end, if you don't see the change, you've got to ask why. And there are big sociological reasons that are behind that. And that's largely what I've been exploring. And there's chunks of that in my book, which I know we're going to talk about. So,
yeah, no, I'd love to transition to your book, because I do think that, as you already touched on earlier, about how in 2019, there's just so many ways to teach without that certification, or to do without, basically the gatekeepers are disappearing, whether it's putting out your music, publishing a book, becoming an expert. And so it's really hard to know what qualifies somebody as an expert anymore. And we want to encourage people to stand in their power and to share their knowledge. But what happens when those people are charlatans? What happens when those people are being unduly elevated? Like it's a really interesting time. But you are going through the process of writing a book right now about kind of the future of the law and what you see coming down the road, how that impacts the way we think about the way we practice law. Why don't I let you tell us why you are writing this book, what you're hoping to accomplish, and kind of what people can expect?
Yeah, it's funny because at the end I make a little joke about the book, whether it is actually a future of law book, because I don't mention bots, I don't talk about the blockchain, whatever the hell that is, or AI or any of that stuff. It does not come up. And what the book is really about is labor, is people, is the future of lawyers as workers, as members of this system, again, with the lofty goal of purposely preserving humanity, consciously making the decisions that preserve humanity. And the sociology of expertise comes up in that a lot. Like, it's not about credentials, it's about something else. There's some other thing that is the deliverable that clients want. And it's not the illusion of expertise, which is what we put off most of the time. It's really that illusion of expertise that we sell. We want people to believe that we're experts, and people are happy to buy that thing. But then we have a responsibility to have a deliverable that is genuine expertise. And so part of what drove me, if I can tell you about something that's got me really concerned of late, I was scrolling through the Twitter machine, and a buddy of mine, Aaron, retweeted an article from the Financial Times that talked about why companies should hire generalists, people who have high emotional intelligence and they're very adaptable, and that, you know, their skills are human, and so they can bounce around between jobs. I did not read the article because it had a paywall, and I'm not paying to read a Financial Times article, but it triggered this, pattern that I see of encouraging the generalist. And for a long time, I've been a fan of Dan Pink and his books, and he wrote Free Agent Nation after working in the Clinton White House. He worked for the Labor Department. He was a speechwriter for Robert Reich, who was the labor secretary. And so he's been writing about labor futurism for a long time. And he since has written a couple more books. There's one called A Whole New Mind, where he talks about focusing on the I think it's the right brain stuff. Is that the human, whatever, interactive side? But building that emotional intelligence and whatever. And then he wrote a book called, I think it's called Everybody Sells. And the idea in that book is every job, function, whatever, you're a salesperson now and you need to learn these skills. Over and over again in these books and in a lot of this advice that's coming out, workers are being encouraged to be generalists, to be emotionally intelligent and able to adapt. And then the big companies are being told, okay, now you guys need to make it so really adaptable employees can work here, which means they have to create tasks that are simple enough, not complex, so that someone who bounces around can bounce into that. And what you're seeing as a result is a shift of all the economic power from the laborer to the company. Because a company like Amazon, who can figure out how to plug in anybody with basic emotional competence because their systems are so good, Amazon makes an absurd amount of money, and then the very replaceable worker makes hardly anything, right? And so you see this stagnation since the 70s of real wages. You saw this whole fight with Amazon building a thing in an HQ in New York, and the whole fight about, okay, you're bringing a lot of jobs, but what the heck? Like $100,000 in New York City is barely a living wage. These are the same wages adjusted for inflation that we were offering back in the 70s. There's this question not of jobs, but of the quality of jobs, right? Sorry, that was a lot of words, but that was what I was really exploring in this book, is not how to be the lawyer that's really adaptive and a generalist and can bounce around. Employers love generalists in general, but they love generalist lawyers, people who can bounce around from project to project and never develop deep expertise. That's really valuable inside a company, but that's not the promise of the system. of the technology, of the advances. The promise that I argue of these advances is that deep experts now have a connectivity that there's a market for them. So if you're the cow expert that lives in Goliad, Texas, in the middle of nowhere, if you're that lawyer who thinks of cattle as, property and you're that nerdy, you used to serve ranchers locally or whatever, but that was it. You just found your 5 buyers and you lived in this little. Well, now because of the connectivity of the marketplaces, you can serve. Your access to market is enormous, right? You can be the cow expert to worldwide. And so to me, the promise of connective technology is not that we all become generalists who are pretty sweet to people and can get through the tasks of the day, because that transfers all the power to employers. But instead, we can become irreplaceable, deep experts. You need us. You need me as an individual, and therefore I can charge appropriately and build a business around that deep expertise. So that's what the book is about, is specialization and collaboration. It's making the choice to build into a future of connected experts instead of kind of a hive of generalists.
I love it because it intuitively makes sense to me, maybe because it's how I've set up my own career. So it's self-fulfilled,
Sure. Anything that makes us feel like we're already smart, we're like, yes, I'm totally with that. That's a great book. Great idea.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, because it justifies all the hard work I've put into becoming a specialist in a really, really small market, but one that's very highly compensated and that I believe will not be going away anytime soon. So I think that if I ever wanted to, as long as I want a job doing corporate finance in, aviation.
Nerd.
I will have one.
Nerd. Yeah, that'll be around forever.
Because airplanes aren't going anywhere anytime soon, at least not in my lifetime. But what do you see as the resistance in the legal field? I mean, I think that lawyers generally like to play in their own sandbox. And maybe that's my own background coming from a big law environment where very much, you could have one transaction which had like 27 people on it because it was like, oh, I only read these provisions. I only read the tax provisions. If they're tax provisions that relate to real estate, it goes to real estate. And real estate's like, oh, I only read real estate. And that's just how we did everything. Everything was very, very much like, and that's how I was trained. And so then I just became the specialist on the little area that I knew. And so coming in-house, it's been a real struggle for me because sometimes people ask me to look at like vendor contracts. I'm like, that's not what I do. Well, I don't know how to And
I will say sort of to that.
No, go ahead.
Big firms are kind of a weird environment because there's I told you I worked in logistics before I went to law school. And so I talk about this legal supply chain, this idea of these connected experts. Big firms sort of do that, but their whole system is designed for inefficiency. It is, when I think of the supply chain, somebody asked me once, what does the supply chain do? And my answer was, it gets people what they want, when they want it, at a price that's less than the value perceived, right? So big law does not do this.
Absolutely.
So to give an example, there was a guy, he was in the UK, he was getting some kind of PhD in economics or something, and he decided to make an artisan toaster. He wrote a book about this, and he was just going to make this toaster. And so instead of going to Target or whatever and buying a toaster for $20, he decided he was going to go around and get the parts, and he was going to, I think he like smelted the metal and like he did the whole thing. And he made this thing from scratch and made this beautiful artisan toaster. And at the end of it, the toaster cost $2,300 and didn't work.
That's big law.
Yeah, it's big law, right? And because there's so much design for inefficiency in that, and efficiency as a goal, I really don't care about efficiency as a goal, and I really don't care about reducing costs as a goal in and of itself. To me, money is all about charge enough to deliver on the promise you made, and if people want the promise, I don't really care how much money you make. But the supply chain is designed to get people what they want when they want it with a good experience. And so take my daughter, for example. If I go to Walmart and we ask for a doll, there's not some guy at Walmart who calls a factory in China and says, hey, Maya needs a doll. And then they make that doll at the Walmart-owned factory in China, and then a Walmart-owned truck takes it to the boat and a Walmart-owned train, blah, blah, blah. it is really unusual to me to think of all of the pieces along that chain as one company. What it really is a bunch of independent experts who are managed, that are overseen. So there's connection and there's management, and which is very unusual for lawyers. I don't think that we do that very well because, again, we don't ask who's it for and what's the change we want to see. For my daughter, what Walmart wants to see is a doll that she cares about, that I can afford to get because they built in those efficiencies, that's delivered at a time that she wants it, right? And with an experience that makes her feel good and special. And that's all a logistics argument. Like we were talking earlier about Amazon. We had a return and my wife says, we need to go by the UPS store and, drop this thing off for this return for Amazon. And I was like, crap, I got to print out the stupid thing. I got to go into Amazon and print out the piece of paper. And she goes, no, you don't do that anymore. You just take your phone and you go in and they scan the QR code and they return it. I'm like, holy crap, Amazon. Like you're making it super easy for me to give you something back. That's insane. And as lawyers, when we are so bad at that, but that thing is a logistics question, that Amazon is a logistics business. And that was a supply chain decision. Amazon said, we know returns are going to be part of this process of having a durable goods company. So let's design that step so that it is a great experience for the buyer, because that buyer is going to come back tomorrow. Lawyers, and I talk about this in the book, we have a churn model. We have this churning cases model of getting to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And so we don't think of it the way Amazon does. We don't think about network effects. We don't think about community. We don't think about the lifetime value of a client. We think about the next hour and the next client and getting next. And that churn is so crushing for the people who work inside that, which is you and me. And so in the end, what my book is really an argument about is get out of that churn. Your work, your quality as a person, as a laborer in this effort to preserve humanity is not your next hour. It's not the next case. It's not the churn. Your real quality, your contribution is how do you get the change in the people you aim to serve? And so in the book, I identify two broad categories of the most valuable people on a legal supply chain, which are the deep experts, the people who are delivering on the promise of deep expertise. That's what we say we do as lawyers. And the audience connectors, the people who understand how to shape human behavior and to persuade and to ask hard questions and to get the movement for these people. So, in a way, Amazon is that point of sale. They're that audience-focused business. And then the businesses behind it that are, you can go buy a shirt right now that says your birthday on it, says your name and your birthday, and they can print that thing on demand. And 100 years ago, that's insane. 50 years ago, that's insane. They're going to make one product for one person, but they figured out how to deliver that kind of deep connected expertise because the access to the large market makes it so that person can be that nerdy and make that super focused thing, and it delivers a quality experience for the end user. Lawyers can do the same thing. We can deliver deep expertise because the connection makes it possible. And we can have that expertise make real changes for human beings because the connection makes it possible. So the book is about taking your place in that supply chain.
Oh, I could talk about this forever, especially now as a consumer of legal goods, as an in-house counsel. It's shocking to me, like the lack of customer service and the lack of understanding of what brings value to me. I swear if one more person drafts a memo that I didn't ask for and then bills me for it, it will throw my computer out of the window.
Well, and
I don't want to read a 10-page memo. I just want a 2-sentence answer.
I think we get into a lot of the business justifications for this or that and the efficiency. And we think of Amazon as this logistics company with these efficiencies and super great. I think we underestimate the social change that has happened because of companies like Amazon. Amazon is just one piece of a larger social change that's happening. And if lawyers are behind I don't want to tell lawyers, listen, if you go get an online scheduler, or if you put this app in or into practice or whatever, those little tweaks and efficiencies might make you think that you're Amazon, but you're really not. Like, logistics matters, supply chain matters, but the biggest social change that's happening is 80% of people with discernible legal problems are not calling us. That is a major issue. And when we talk about expertise, like you mentioned before, there's a great book, Tom Nichols, called The Death of Expertise. We're not doing a good job because anyone, quote unquote, can be an expert. The average consumer doesn't want to rely on Wikipedia. They don't want to have the moron on YouTube tell them what to do. I think there's still a hunger for genuine expertise, but we as lawyers are not delivering it. The logistics problem is a social problem, and the implications of that are huge. And so in the book, I'm arguing not, yes, there is a business justification for choosing to either be a deep expert or to be an audience connector that designs these supply chains. Yes, those are the least replaceable people on the supply chain, and therefore the most economically viable. I'm making an economics argument, build a business that can last fine. But really, I'm making a social argument. I'm getting back to those big questions that drove me to law school in the first place and saying, what are we doing with society? And if we as lawyers are not delivering expertise, this is what people want when they want it. If we're not delivering deep expertise, and if we're not giving them an experience that makes them adopt that expertise and make changes in their lives, then we're not delivering on the promise of our industry. And that's the social issue that bugs me. And so that really is what motivated me to write the book. And as I'm sure I'll transition into writing another book, the reason that I will keep writing is because these questions need to be explored. And I hope that what anyone who's listening to this will do is they'll say, in the same way that Mike is an idiot making stuff up, writing books, exploring big issues, you can be that idiot too, right?
We can all, yes.
Yeah, you can all be the idiot. I mean, listen, all of this life is an act of developing character. And when you go create something, whatever that is, writing a book or running a law firm or whatever it is, you're trying to change the culture. The culture is just a collection of characters, right? So by changing your own character out loud, by writing a book or whatever you're doing, creating out loud in a way that can be criticized and that can change you so that you can impact the culture, what you're then trying to do is change the character of those other people. So they become the kind of people who incorporate expertise into their decision making, which is what we as lawyers a lot of times are trying to get people to do. We're trying to purposely design society. That is an act of expertise and social connection. And so anyway, read the book. It's in the background, by the way, is my own personal journey of giving myself permission to take my place in the legal supply chain. Yes, there's this bigger social argument. Yes, there's this business argument. But this is a fundamentally human journey. Deciding to be an expert and to take my place on a legal supply chain is a fundamentally human exercise that I would encourage anyone listening to engage in. So read the book. Read the book. Just read the book.
Awesome. Great. So I want to talk about this forever, but I'm going to transition us to the next segment of the show, which I call the happiness hot seat, which is just a round of quick fire questions that I like to squeeze in at the very end so that I can get these answers for my own benefit and the benefit of everyone listening. You ready?
Yep.
All right. Number 1, how do you deal with indecision?
Has anyone made that joke before? Somebody has to have made that joke before.
You get the number 1, the first.
There you go. That is probably actually my legitimate answer too. Usually my default when I have indecision is just to go do something stupid. That's my plan. I just go do stupid things.
Do one of the things that are stupid or do other things until you figure out.
The first one, my indecision, I have so much indecision. I do, and lawyers are great at strategy, but we're really bad at going and doing stuff.
Yep.
Getting back to the permission thing we talked about, I just give myself permission to go break something. And my sweet wife has stayed married to me, so the rest of it doesn't really matter. I just go break things.
Fantastic.
I'm okay with breaking stuff.
Number 2, what do you do or how do you prioritize your own happiness?
As my wife always says, we date the hell out of each other. We are together all the time. My daughter, who was, I think, 12 at the time, once referred to us as a power couple and tried to give us one of those names, the Brangelinas or whatever. She refers to us as Tapori, which is Topanga and Corey from, what is that show called?
World?
Yeah, Boy Meets World, and then the Girl Meets World. Anyway,
Well, yes.
She refers to us as Tapori because we're this combination. So we Nicole and my wife and I, we are just together all the time. I just love being with her, and she really is my favorite person in the world. And so I just prioritize that, and that gives me a lot of happiness.
I love it. Can you describe a mindset shift that changed your life?
Yeah, I realize that there's no checklist Jesus, I call it. And that sounds specific to a religion for an idea that really isn't. But I always grew up with this idea that if you check a bunch of boxes, then you will get to blah, 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 whatever that is. Somebody actually wanted to edit my book, a buddy of mine actually, and he asked me, what are my SMART goals for 2019 for this book? And I was like, did you even read the book? I have no idea what the hell that means. Like, I don't have SMART goals. I just do the things that a writer does. And guess what? Writing happens, And so for me, when I realized that there's not a checklist Jesus, but there is only the development of character, the path to salvation is not going down some list. I think this is doctrinally correct, frankly, but I also think that it is personally correct. Stop thinking of benchmarks and start thinking about developing your character, because then you will reach benchmarks you never would have imagined before.
That's so good. That's so good. Can you name a book that has inspired you on your journey?
Essentialism. Greg McKeown. It is just an amazing, the book briefly says, do less, but better. And the idea is that we scramble around as generalists. We do a bunch of stupid crap. That's the issue with generalism, is you spend 80% of your time doing stuff that has no impact. The idea behind the book is stop doing that, reduce what you do it really well, and that will have more long-term impact than the combination of the little things that you were doing.
I haven't read Essentialism. I've read one thing, but I assume it's similar premise.
I love it. It really is a great book, a life-changing book. Fantastic.
Number 5, what do you think separates happy lawyers from those lawyers who struggle to find happiness in life with a law degree?
I think the unhappy lawyers identify themselves with a to be verb, and the happy lawyers identify themselves with to do verbs, action verbs. Think about that. Like, somebody asks you, what do you do? We don't answer with I do X. We answer with I am a lawyer. We answer with a to be verb. And that means every professional failure is a personal failure, right? Everything that we do in our lives, it makes us not experiment. It makes us not try things. It makes us not willing to stumble, because I am a lawyer. So if I lose a case, or if I don't win this deal or whatever, it is not I am a failure, because I am a lawyer, and lawyers do these things. I think the key to happiness in the law is starting to use action verbs and question what you do. Are you the kind of person that does the things that delivers on the promises you make? And if so, you'll feel fulfilled.
I think you might have bugged my phone. I literally had this conversation with Jeremy yesterday where I said the same thing. I said that I think it's the lawyers who say I am a lawyer versus lawyers who say I practice law.
Yeah.
Oh, it's creepy.
Well, and especially because how one is a lawyer is a question that is in so much flux, right? I consider myself a lawyer. If anybody asks me, I consider myself on the legal supply chain, but I don't file cases anymore. I mean, I rarely will take a case just to help somebody, but I don't file cases. I don't argue in court. I don't do deals. I don't write documents. I'm not a lawyer in that sense, and yet I'm still a lawyer. And I think as we move in through technology and into the future, if being a lawyer is defined by the many inefficiencies that we bill for, then we're in trouble. So if you identify yourself as I am a lawyer, and being a lawyer means this and that process, then you're going to have a major problem. So stop identifying yourself that way and ask what problem you solve. I say that to my kids all the time. I don't ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? I say, what problem do you want to solve? Focus on that problem, and you'll always have a spot.
Yeah, love it. Wonderful. So before we wrap up, I like to give listeners an opportunity to send in some questions. And I actually have 2 really good questions today that I hope we can touch on really quickly. And the first is from One Crafty Lawyer on Instagram. And she says, What advice do you have for bringing others on the journey? In a traditional law firm, innovation is often seen as a dirty word.
Is that a question to me?
Yep.
Okay, so short version, there's a book called Friend of a Friend by David Burkus. And I talk about in the book that I'm writing about these social connections. The answer to the question is the opposite of what every business book would tell you. The answer to the question is to build a silo, to build a social silo. And the key to the supply chain and to this idea of connecting to others is not avoid social silos. It's accept that that's going to happen. Get fans of you together. Surround yourself with fans of you. I don't care if you start a meetup or if you start a Facebook group or if you hang out with some people at the bar, whatever. Surround yourself with people who believe in similar ways to you, who are engaged and excited to innovate, because then the work will become apparent, and whatever job that you have that doesn't want to get on board your freak train of being awesome, then leave that job and go somewhere else. I don't see any upside of trying to persuade people who are not ready. I would rather build the social silo that encourages that kind of innovation. And if I have to go somewhere else or connect in some other way, that's just the way it is. I have no time to waste on people who are never going to get it.
I think that's a very practical and respectable response. So,
okay.
Next question from E. Lil, maybe on Instagram, wondering if her time is better spent innovating in areas of substantive law or in the way we practice law, or maybe both. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't care. I have no feelings about one or the other. Again, in the book, I identify two core business models, one that's based on deep, nerdy expertise, substantive law, basically, and one that's targeted to systems and processes, solopreneurs, right? Like people who want to scale and want to grow. And so I guess the answer to the question is yes. I think both are fundamentally important. The problem that I have with the story that we tell lawyers is that we tell them to do both at the same time. And I don't think that those two things are compatible. Accessibility and deep expertise are not compatible. You can't text a lawyer and get deep expertise. You might have solved the accessibility issue, the innovation, whatever. You can get to me on my text machine now, but we didn't solve the deep expertise problem because now you're doing the work of a solutions engine, of somebody who's the audience builder, audience connector. So I don't care which you do. I would simply advise that you pick one and you focus like crazy on it. And then again, the job is to connect to other people who do the other stuff.
Awesome. So thank you so much for all the questions you guys send in. And if you guys want to send in a question for the next show, you can follow me at The Happy Lawyer Project on Instagram. And I'm always giving you opportunities to participate in the show in my stories. Thank you so much, Mike, for being on the show today. Before I end this, I have to give you an opportunity to pitch the book one last time. Where can people pick it up? When does it come out? And how can people follow along?
I don't know when it comes out. Stop messing with me, man. If you go to lawyerforward.com/book updates, that is where I'm sharing information about the process and literally the process. Like I wanted to work out loud with this thing too. It will be called Lawyer Forward, Finding Your Place in the Future of Law. So just go to lawyerforward.com/book updates. And then I'm at Mike Whelan Jr. on Twitter and on LinkedIn. I deleted Facebook yesterday because it's a cesspool and I hate it. So you cannot find me on Facebook anymore. When you get to a point that your mom is fighting with random Facebook acquaintances about politics, like it's time to go, right? Get rid of the Facebook. So you can find me on LinkedIn and Twitter. It's Mike Whelan Jr., Jr.
Awesome. And I got off Facebook about almost a year and a half ago. So I'm right there with you, brother. So I will include links to all of those handles and things on the website at thehappylawyerproject.com. So you guys can head over there after the show. Thanks so much, Mike.
Thank you, dear.
Thanks so much for listening. And if you got value out of this episode and you think there's someone else who might enjoy it, I'd love for you guys to share. And if you have any questions for me, please head over to the website at thehappylawyerproject.com and you can leave me a voicemail right on the website. When you get there, you'll see a little tab on the right hand of the screen and you can click on it and leave a voicemail there. I absolutely love hearing from you guys. Last but not least, if you enjoy this podcast and you like the content that I'm bringing to you guys and you haven't done so already, I would really encourage you guys to head over to Apple Podcasts and leave me a rating and review. That's all for this week. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening.